dog didn't even look up when Marcus walked in. That was the thing that stayed with him afterward, not the smell of the place, not the overhead lights humming too loud, not the way the floor squeaked under his boots. It was the fact that every other animal in that hallway turned toward the door when he opened it. Every dog lifted its head. Every tail found a reason to move. Everyone except the small brown and white mutt in the second cage from the end, who sat with his back to the door, like he'd already made a decision about people and wasn't interested in reconsidering. Marcus almost walked past him entirely. He should have. He had no business being there. It was a Thursday in late October in Hargrove, Oregon, the kind of fall day that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Pale sun in the morning, steel-gray clouds by noon, wind that pushed leaves across the parking lot in small, desperate circles. Marcus Webb had driven 40 minutes from his apartment in the valley to drop off his neighbor's cat carrier, which he'd borrowed 3 weeks earlier for a reason he no longer fully remembered, and which had been sitting in his truck bed ever since, waiting for him to do something about it. His neighbor, Denise, had been calling it the carrier situation every time she saw him. He had decided on Thursday morning that this was the week he resolved the carrier situation. The Hargrove County Animal Shelter was the closest place he could think of that would accept a donated carrier, and so here he was, standing in a parking lot, holding a blue plastic cat carrier with a broken latch that he'd zip-tied shut, feeling slightly ridiculous. He was 34 years old. He had done 2 tours. He had been through Ceres school, combat diving, and a debrief that lasted 11 hours in a room with no windows. He was nervous about walking into an animal shelter. That was what it had come to. Marcus had been out of the Navy for 14 months. 14 months of quiet, of space, of waking up at 0430 out of habit with nowhere to be until 7. He had a job now, consulting work for a private security firm, mostly remote, mostly reading other people's risk assessments and writing comments in the margins. It was the kind of work that kept his mind moving without requiring the rest of him to follow. He had an apartment with good locks and a window that faced east, and a coffee maker that he'd calibrated to start brewing at 041 phi, so that when he woke up ahead of it, the smell was already there to tell him the day had started. It was a good life, organized, predictable. He was not going to adopt a dog. The woman at the front desk had short silver hair and the calm, practiced warmth of someone who had heard every excuse for showing up at an animal shelter without intending to leave with an animal. "You can leave the carrier right here," she said, nodding toward a low shelf near the door already stacked with donated items. "And if you want to take a look around while you're here, feel free." "Just the carrier," Marcus said. "Of course," she said in the tone of someone who had said that before. He set down the carrier. He turned to leave. And then, for a reason he would think about for a long time afterward, some combination of the gray sky outside and the fact that he had no particular reason to be anywhere else, he turned back. "How long is the hallway?" he asked. She smiled like she'd been waiting for that question all morning. The small dog section was at the far end of the shelter, past the cats and a row of kennels with medium-sized dogs who greeted him with various levels of enthusiasm, a spotted hound who pressed himself against the chain-link fence, a shepherd mix who paced anxious circuit, a beagle who barked 3 times, then seemed satisfied with having made his point. Marcus walked slowly. He kept his hands at his sides. He didn't make the sounds people usually made in places like this. The cooing, the high-pitched baby talk, the "who's a good boy" that he'd never quite understood how to produce naturally. He just walked and looked, the same way he used to walk a perimeter. Steady, taking stock. That was when he saw the brown and white dog. It was small, maybe 15 pounds, some kind of beagle terrier mix, ears that couldn't quite decide whether to stand up or fold over. He was sitting in the center of his kennel with his back to the walkway, looking at the wall, not sleeping, not pacing, just sitting with a patience that seemed pointed. Marcus stopped. He stood there for a moment. Then he crouched down to the level of the kennel. "Hey," he said. The dog didn't move. Marcus stayed where he was. He had nowhere to be. He waited. 40 seconds passed. He counted them out of habit. Then the dog turned his head, not fully, just enough to look at Marcus from the corner of one eye. His expression was difficult to read. It wasn't distrust, exactly. It was more like the look of someone who had extended an invitation once and been stood up, and wasn't about to look too eager about extending it again. Marcus recognized it. He sat down on the floor. The shelter worker who found him there 10 minutes later would describe it to her coworker as the big, quiet guy just sitting cross-legged on the floor, talking to the dog who hates everyone. And she would say it with the particular tone of someone who had seen a lot of things in this job and was not entirely sure how to file this one. The dog's name, according to the card on the kennel, was Bus. He had been brought in 6 weeks earlier as a stray, found near the highway with a small cut on his left ear that had healed clean. No chip, no tags. The card said he was approximately 2 years old, had passed his temperament assessment, was good with other dogs and mostly indifferent to cats, and that he was selective with people. Marcus asked the intake coordinator, a young man named Derek, with 2 pencils tucked behind his ear, what selective with people meant in practice. "He doesn't greet," Derek said. "Most dogs in there, you walk up, they come to the front, Bus just sits. We've had him 6 weeks, and there are volunteers who have come in every day who haven't gotten more than a glance out of him. He came to the front of the kennel just now," Marcus said. Derek looked up from his clipboard. "When? About 5 minutes ago. When I stood up to come find you." Derek set down his clipboard and walked back down the hallway with Marcus. They stopped in front of the kennel. Bus was sitting in the center again, his back to them. "Huh," Derek said. "Has he ever been adopted?" Marcus asked. "Returned twice," Derek said. He said it with the careful neutrality of someone reporting a fact without editorializing. First family said he wouldn't warm up. Second said pretty much the same thing. They were nice people. It wasn't anybody's fault. Marcus looked at the dog. The dog looked at the wall. "I'll take the paperwork," Marcus said. He drove home with Bus in the passenger seat, not the back, because Bus had stood at the back door for a moment and then walked to the front door and looked up at Marcus in a way that wasn't a request so much as a statement of preference. Marcus had opened the front door. Bus had climbed in, turned around twice, and then settled with his chin on the center console and his eyes forward, watching the road the way dogs sometimes did when they were genuinely interested in where they were going. Marcus kept glancing at him. Bus kept watching the road. They drove most of the way in silence, which suited them both. The first week was careful and quiet. Marcus had read 3 articles about introducing rescue dogs to a new home before he got there, not because he was anxious, he told himself, but because he liked to have a briefing before an operation. He had cleared out a corner of the living room and put down a dog bed. He had bought food and a water bowl and a collar in a dark green that he thought suited the dog's general demeanor. He had a leash hanging on the hook by the door next to his own keys. Bus explored the apartment on his first night with the thorough, systematic attention of someone who had lived long enough to know that spaces could change on you if you didn't get the layout memorized early. He checked every room. He sniffed every corner. He stood at the window for a while, looking at the parking lot below, and then he walked back to the living room and lay down on the dog bed without any ceremony. Marcus had been watching from the hallway. He went to bed. At some point in the early hours of the morning, near 300 maybe, or close to it, he woke up. Not from a dream, exactly. More from the particular quality of stillness that sometimes hit at that hour, when the silence had a texture to it and the walls of the apartment felt closer than they were in daylight. He lay there for a minute, doing the quiet math of it, where he was, what day it was, what was expected of him in the morning. Then he heard the small, careful sound of paws on the hardwood floor. Bus appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, looking at Marcus in the bed. Then he walked to the side of the mattress, jumped up with a confidence that suggested he had already made its decision before executing it, turned twice, and lay down in the space between Marcus' legs and the edge of the bed. He let out a long, slow exhale. Marcus stared at the ceiling. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't planned for this. He had gone to return a cat carrier and had come home with a 15-pound dog who hated everyone and had apparently decided, for reasons that were not yet clear, that this apartment and this particular person were where he intended to be. Marcus reached down without thinking and put his hand on the dog's back. Bus didn't move. Marcus left his hand there. After a while he fell back asleep. There is a particular kind of quiet that fills a person after years of living at high alert, not peace, not quite, but an absence that has the same shape as peace from a distance. Marcus had been living inside that quiet for over a year without fully knowing what to do with it. He kept busy because busy was easier. He kept his routines because routines required no explanation. He kept his distance from most things that could develop into something he'd have to give a name to. Bus didn't accommodate any of that. He didn't demand. He wasn't the kind of dog who brought you his leash at 6 in the morning and stared at you until you got up. He didn't sit at your feet while you worked and gaze up at you with theatrical longing. What he did was simpler and somehow more difficult to ignore. He just showed up. He was in whatever room Marcus was in, not in an anxious, hovering way, more the way a person who knows you well will end up in the same general space without making a project of it. He was just there. And slowly, without Marcus quite choosing it, he started talking to the dog. Not about anything significant at first. Logistics. Is going to make coffee. Back in a minute. The names of street passed on their morning walks. What he thought about the wind direction, small things, spoken aloud, that he realized partway through had been living only in his head for the past 14 months. Then one evening in November, sitting on the floor with his back against the couch and Bus asleep with his head on Marcus's knee, he said something that surprised him. He said, "I don't really know what I'm doing." He hadn't meant to say it out loud. Bus opened one eye. "I know," Marcus said. "I know." Bus closed the eye again. Marcus sat there for a long time after that, in the particular warmth of the dog's weight against his knee, and thought about the word selective. How Derek had said it like an apology, and how Marcus had heard it and thought with a certainty that arrived before any reasoning. Same. He took Bus to the shelter for a follow-up wellness check in December. The silver-haired woman at the front desk saw them come in and made a sound of pure satisfaction. "There he is," she said. Bus walked up to the desk and sat down in front of her with a patience that Marcus had learned, by now, to read as affection. She looked at Marcus. "He likes you," she said. "He tolerates me," Marcus said. She laughed. Honey, for Bus, those are the same thing. Some things changed slowly. Some things Marcus didn't notice until they had already changed. He started keeping the window shades open more. He started leaving the radio on when he cooked, because Bus seemed to have opinions about music, and would tilt his head at strings and ignore percussion entirely, which Marcus found unreasonably entertaining. He started answering Denise's invitations to come over for dinner, instead of declining them with brief, apologetic texts. He told her about the carrier, finally, in January. She laughed for a long time. She said she had known the whole time that the shelter was going to keep him longer than the carrier drop-off. I went back 3 times before I adopted my second cat, she said. The first time is never just to drop something off. Marcus looked at Bus, who was sitting in Denise's kitchen, looking at her elderly tabby with the careful neutrality of someone determined not to start anything. I guess not, he said. He called his brother in February for the first time in 8 months, not because something was wrong, just because it was a Sunday and Bus was asleep in a square of winter sunlight on the living room floor, and Marcus found himself thinking about the last time he'd heard his brother laugh and realized he couldn't remember what the laugh sounded like anymore. His brother picked up on the second ring. They talked for an hour. This is the part of the story where Marcus would say nothing dramatic happened, no single moment, no breakthrough. Just one Thursday in October when he walked into a shelter to return a cat carrier, and a dog in the second kennel from the end turned away from him, and Marcus sat down on the floor anyway, and waited, and after 40 seconds something turned around and looked. That was it. That was all of it. A door opened. Something small and deliberate walked through, and in a quiet room, in an ordinary building, on a gray day in Oregon, 2 things that had been waiting to be chosen, and hadn't quite known it, found each other. Marcus would say, if you asked him, that Bus was a good dog. What he meant was something larger. He just hadn't found the words for it yet. If this story reached you somewhere quiet, leave a comment below, just a word, or a city, or something you noticed. And if you know someone who keeps their distance from things that might follow them home, share this with them. Sometimes the right story finds the right person at the right time. We'll see you in the next one.